Welcome back. Double Gaming, brought to you by our friends at LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute. Going to be joined by Drs. Kevin Crutchfield as well as Dr. Craig Bennett around here. They are the new game plan for all sports-related injuries. I've got a little issue going on with my elbow. I'm going to go see Dr. Bennett about that. Dr. Kevin Crutchfield also joined us last week to talk about my wife's ambition of running a half marathon this year and things that they can do out there at Foundry Row to help her run better, to plot her goal to be a weekend warrior and running the Baltimore Running Festival this year. So lots going on. LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute. We'll be telling you more about them. Also, our friends at Buffalo Wild Wings in Bel Air, where they're still featuring the $5 game day menu up at the festival. Go see them up there. Make life easier and try their new online ordering system as well. It's Buffalo Wild Wings in Bel Air. We hope to get back up there for maybe some playoff activity next month. Also, Strategic Factory, marketing, printing, promotional goods of all kinds, all in one shop, all in Owings Mills. We'll be telling you more about them. Find them at strategicfactory.com if you need signage, printing, branded material, stuff like this. My Coppin State hat. Get some Coppin State basketball around here as they begin their MEAC play. Luke Jones is here, and we got a lot of great sponsors and a new year ahead, but all eyes, including over Coppin State, on the Ravens this week. And, let's just start with this, right? Because there's a million things I have on my list that I want to talk about, Luke. And I want to talk about Carson, California, and Phillip Rivers, and I want to talk about Black Monday pending around, and more about the Ravens defense being number one, and, of course, Lamar Jackson and Baker Mayfield, and here come the Browns. But the Harbaugh thing can't be ignored, right? So as the sun set on Friday, there was a press release, there was something in reaction to something, and they needed to win the game, then they win the game, now they need to win this game, then they'll need to win the next game. I'm not convinced, and Pro Football Talk, I know, wrote about this on Christmas Day as to where John Harbaugh and Jim Harbaugh, this is the week for the silly season. And, everybody thought Josh McDaniel was just going to take the Colts job last year. He didn't, and now Frank Reich is playing for a chance to go into the playoffs. But I'm not buying what anybody's selling out there right now, and I wasn't feeling it as Harbaugh was asked about it in the postgame. I don't think there's any agreement to do anything other than to, play the game this week and play football, and whatever contractual obligations they currently have is what they are. But I don't think John Harbaugh is inked as the coach for 2022 right now.
Well, I think it's up in the air. I don't think it's necessarily a case where John Harbaugh doesn't want to return or the Ravens are blatantly lying or anything like that. But I don't know about you, and you're way more into this than I am from the standpoint of the news dump on a Friday afternoon. I mean, this was
it was bizarre, dude. It was bizarre,
and that's and I agree. I agree. As much as I think those types of things are sometimes overblown a little bit here in 2018, it was just weird. At 7:00 on a Friday night, roughly just a little over 24 hours away from your biggest game of the season, and you put out a statement that reads verbatim: John Harbaugh will continue as our head coach for the 2019 season, and he and we are working on an extension to his existing contract, which expires after the 2019 season. And knowing how the Ravens...
Which is a middle finger to the Green Bay Packers or to anyone opining that somehow John Harbaugh was just going to, run out and take a job, right? Literally, because that was the way it was portrayed 5 weeks ago, right? Literally, when they were 4-5, the mutual parting of the ways at the end of the year indicated that his contract could have been up or might have been up or whatever. I never thought his deal was done this year, by the way. So, and I know they try to keep it state secret, right? Right. I've never believed that.
Well, the deal was going through 2019. We knew contractually he was committed to the Ravens through 2019. It was just a matter of whether that was going to play out or not. And I don't want to doubt anyone's reporting because lots of people in an organization talk, and lots of people with knowledge within an organization can talk. It doesn't mean everyone is accurate with their information, but the whole concept of a mutual parting of ways, what does that mean exactly? You know what I mean? I'll put it this way, I don't think John Harbaugh and the Ravens were just going to say, we're going to tear up the last year of this deal. It was going to be a case of either the Ravens fire John or, and this is where I still think it could wind up because the weird part about this, Nestor, last year, remember, I believe it was Jerry Sandusky had put something out about John Harbaugh getting a one-year extension. Remember, this was when Flacco was missing training camp with the back issue. Ryan Mallett was just throwing worm ball after worm ball in training camp in the preseason. And it was kind of viewed as, okay, John's getting a one-year kind of forgiveness in case Flacco doesn't come back or isn't effective, or whatever. I mean, we talked about that at that point in time. But I recall then the Ravens put out a tweet saying that Harbaugh had been extended for an extra season. And then they took it down, and they were kind of disputing that they had announced it. And I wasn't surprised by that because they've always been very, very hush-hush about.
Well, and the other part of it's John's super sensitive. Brian didn't care about anything.
Sure.
Brian just didn't care. Brian still doesn't care. I mean, he's our partner here on behalf of the Living Classrooms Foundation. He's just not really into anything sort of covert or the necessity for that. You know what I mean? Like he was just, you guys are going to figure it out anyway. Let's just give it to you, and that way I'm always telling you the truth, and you never second guess me because I'm always telling you the truth.
Right.
It's not that way with John. John has not managed that thing this way from the beginning. Steve prefers it to be hush-hush, which makes guys like you and me and Jeff Zrebeck and Jamison Hensley and everybody else, as well as Pro Football Talk and Jason Lockenfora and Adam Schefter and everybody else unearth this stuff, right?
Sure. And I think what's strange about it for me is acknowledging how that scenario played out last year with his one-year tackle and extension and understanding how they have typically operated. And it's not even a knock. It's just knowing how they've typically handled these kind of things, for them to, one, make an announcement at 7 o'clock on a Friday night that John Harbaugh would return next year, and two, to do that while not having an extension in hand. It would have been one thing if they announced it and said John Harbaugh has reached an extension that will keep him as the Ravens coach beyond 2019, and they probably wouldn't have announced how many years, but it would have been clear that he is no longer approaching lame duck status, and he's our guy for the foreseeable future. Understanding that you can give a coach a contract extension and then fire him next week if you really want to. And we know what happened with Brian Billick a year after he got an extension after that exceptional 2006 season. So it's not as though the length of the deal is that substantial from other than you're on the hook to pay that. But I just find it very odd that they would put something out. I mean, as far as this whole not wanting Harbaugh to flap in the wind and people saying that it took the pressure off the players, and they've been dealing with this for weeks. So what?
Well, it sort of
Friday?
felt like to me like all day Saturday, the pregame shows have everybody's attention on Saturday, and the Ravens were going to be on national TV in front of the whole world, maybe spitting up and losing a game that was going to knock them out. Like the season. Come on, man. I mean, they were one play away, literally, at various points in the game, away from having a 6-hour plane ride home and the agony of the season being over. Like, that's where they went out there, and I don't know whose itchy trigger finger on Steve's side, the PR side, what John was saying, what the organization was thinking, what Ozzie and Aaron. I have no idea, but it still stands as bizarre. And dude, they might win the Super Bowl 7 weeks from now. Like literally 6 weeks from now, right? Like they might, or they might go down in flames with Baker Mayfield, or they might lose their playoff game to Phillip Rivers, who comes in here and tosses the ball around and they can't figure it out. Or I don't know how this is going to end, but at some point, John Harbaugh's probably not going to win the Super Bowl, but I know that they thought that about Barry Trotz down in D.C. and had to figure all that out. And to your point, the whole notion that you would make some sort of announcement about that would seem that not everything's as harmonious as it certainly wasn't on the mind of any Ravens fan at 7 o'clock on Friday night, I don't think, right? Or in anybody's mind, quite frankly. Why was it on their mind?
Right, and that's where I keep asking why. I mean, and it comes down to this. I mean, Steve Bisciotti acknowledged back in February, and we've talked about this over and over, so it's not, it's not any secret. He acknowledged at the State of the Ravens, the Friday before the Super Bowl, that he considered parting ways with John Harbaugh. And if you acknowledge that, and
And you say it out loud, literally, right?
Right, you say
and
it
the
out
team's
loud,
4-5 at Halloween, right? Like, and you have a change in general manager that you've already announced, right?
Right.
So all of that, we got to stack all this up.
It's weird.
And the stability that the franchise has had, it's weird. And I'm wondering where the trust level is when the reporting in early November is they've agreed to mutually part ways and nobody says anything and everything dangles, and all of a sudden they win for a month and a half, and the reporting is such that Harbaugh was the hottest candidate, and Steve is like, Harbaugh wasn't even a free agent, and he's my property, and he's under my contract. Like, I know how all this works, and this is where it really – so, Luke, just to transition this, because we can go back and forth all day with all of this, and we're not getting anywhere, and it's not beating the Browns one way or another. But one thing is definitely going to happen on Monday, right? A lot of coaches are going to get fired, and a lot of seats are going to get open. And whether – Harbaugh, the season's over because of the agony of Baker Mayfield, and maybe the Ravens can get a second-round pick or a 1 and a 3 for John Harbaugh from the Packers. I don't know. I really don't. But this would be the time for that to be in play as to what John and Ingrid want to do with their lives and their daughter and their future, and what Steve wants to do and what Eric wants to do. And because the season could once again, and we're going to talk about it in real terms here, right? Like, hey, they're going to beat the Browns, and we're going to have a lone playoff game, and the seats are on sale, and let's make our plans. And Nestor's held a flight to Kansas City and Houston because he has, and all that stuff for 2 weeks from now. But if the season ends, all of that reporting on John Harbaugh, all of those bad vibes at 4-5, and all the bad juju with Joe Flacco, and what happens with him now that he, what's his value, and where are we with Lamar, and who's going to coach the team, and what they're going to draft 23rd, or what are they going to draft if they lose? All of that comes into play Monday morning if they lose to the Browns. Now, if it doesn't, it only gets put off for a week. But what's real about this, Luke, is on Monday, there's going to be a dozen places where this is going to be in play. Is Ron Rivera safe? What happens to the Cowboys? Danny Boy, what's he doing with Jay Gruden down there? What's going on in Denver? What's going on in Arizona? Who is an old washed-up coach that wants to coach again? Hey, Bruce Arians wants a job again. And, hey, what's going on with Marvin in Cincinnati? All of that happens Monday, with or without John Harbaugh, right? His brother's name's going to get brought up on Monday, right?
Sure. And I think that's where this gets so much more interesting. And of course, if the Ravens lose Sunday, then this is all expedited as far as what's going to happen. But let's just say, for argument's sake, the Ravens win on Sunday, they win a playoff game, and then divisional round, they go to Kansas City or Houston or wherever they'd be, and they lose, and the season comes to an end. Then, to me, that's where it becomes interesting from a standpoint of, all right, you've said he's going to continue. If he makes the playoffs and wins a playoff game, I think it's hard to argue that that you think he should still be fired. If you're someone that
because he lost to Tom Brady in New England or whatever, right?
I mean, but that said, you still need to work out a contract extension, and that's where I keep coming back to this statement being so strange in making this kind of proclamation.
Well, it says something's going to happen, right?
While not have an extension in hand. So that's where we talk about this from the context of, okay, what do the Ravens want in terms of a potential extension under that scenario? And what does John Harbaugh want under that potential? Understanding that prior to Friday night's 7 o'clock statement, he was and I don't want to say flavor of the month, because John's a good football coach. John has won a Super Bowl. He's been to playoff games. He's had a lot of success. I understand post-Super Bowl 47, it's been mediocre, but that doesn't take away the first 5 years of his tenure that were wildly successful. John understands that he is a hot commodity that is valued by other teams, and that there are other teams that would probably be willing to make him the highest-paid coach in the NFL. So
the highest-paid coach in the NFL, you think he'll get more than $10 million a year?
I think it's if he's the. I'm saying there's a potential for that. I'm not saying definitely, but
if somebody was in love with him enough, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Raiders gave John Gruden $10 million
or at least while the Packers' job is open and it's the best job in the sport, and maybe he covets that job or has privately coveted that job, or they covet him. Maybe they covet him enough to give the Ravens a 2 and a 3, and all of a sudden Eric's like, well, hey, Steve, if we're going to have to go hire a coach anyway, let's go hire a coach and get a 2 and a 3 with it. You know what I mean? Or whatever that thing is that they get of value, that if John doesn't want to be here in 2021 and 22 and 23 for whatever reason, this is the time they're going to dance, right? And not dangle a year and do what Marvin's done in Cincinnati, which is sign on for a year and a year and a year and a year, whatever. That Steve doesn't want to do that dance, and John doesn't need to do that dance, to your point. John can go get himself $50 million from somebody somewhere guaranteed, and while the market's open, and maybe Carolina's open, maybe Miami's open, maybe Green Bay's open, maybe his agent, Brian Harlan, has said, John, this is the year the jobs are going to be open. This is the year maybe Dallas will be open, and Jerry will want a genius like you. I don't know. I don't know even what John thinks about it or how John feels about it, because John is so – I know him better than anybody. Luke, you know that, and I don't know him that well, right? I mean, literally. To know what he's thinking, no one knows what he's thinking. Maybe Jim and his dad. That's Ingrid. That's about it, because that's the kind of company he keeps, man,
Yeah, and that's where I keep coming back to. Even if the Ravens want to extend him, what will it take to get it done? And how long are they willing to commit? And we know, in reality, when you extend a coach for 4 years, it's essentially a 3-year extension, because you know that no one goes into the final year of their deal with lame duck status. It's kind of just the way it works. And we know that you can fire a coach at any point. And Steve Bisciotti paid Brian Billick for, 3 years, I guess it was, he had left on his deal, if I recall correctly. So it's not as though you can't get out of it, but have the Ravens seen enough? Are they that confident that John Harbaugh and his staff are the right staff to lead Lamar Jackson's development, to head that up, to oversee that? Or is it a case of, we want to keep John around, but we don't want to commit 4 or 5 more years to him? And if John doesn't see it that way and kind of says, well, why wouldn't you commit 5 more years to me? Look at what I've done. And more so, look at how I'm being valued elsewhere. That's where you do start to wonder.
I'm sure the Green Bay folks are on the phone with his agent saying, look, if John hit the market, we're good for 5 years and $8.5 million. We're good for $48 million, or whatever it is. Sure. That's still a very, very serious consideration for any member of the Harbaugh family named John, right? That would be important for anyone. And where he is in the life cycle of being a coach, to still be thought of as the guy you want to build your program around. He's yesterday's news here for the fan base, at least, right? I mean, there's nothing that's going to make John Harbaugh exciting to our fan base. He's going to be far more exciting to someone else.
Yeah, it's going to be more so a case of, it's going to be Lamar Jackson driven. Let's face it. I mean, let's just be honest about that. And that's where this is so. I go back to the off season and the idea that Harbaugh, the perception was this is make or break, playoffs or bust. Steve Bisciotti didn't outright say that, but when you acknowledge that you almost fired your coach after New Year's Eve last year, how can it not be? Barring weird circumstances. And I don't know, Nestor, maybe what happened with Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson coming in and having the success that he's had, despite the fact that he's far from being a finished product, maybe that is the extenuating circumstance that Steve Bisciotti kind of was leaving the door open not to fire Harbaugh if they missed the playoffs. And because they didn't know they were going to beat the Chargers on Saturday when they put out that statement.
No doubt about it. I mean, they were a big underdog.
We've talked about it. That game, in the final 3 minutes, it was a 6-point game. If Antonio Gates' knee hits the ground a half second sooner before Patrick Owasso punches that ball out, who knows what happens? So that's not to discredit what they did, but it just speaks to what changed and how dramatically has it changed, where you feel the need to put out this statement unless it's more a case of you're buying time. And I still, part of me really, a big part of me really feels that it still falls into that category, because otherwise, why would you not?
Well, dude, your words eyewash. It was an eyewash thing to do on Friday night that didn't the lens didn't need to be cleaned. You know what I mean? Like I guess if you're just doing it to stave off Jason LaCanfora and Adam Schefter's reports.
Why didn't you do that 5 weeks ago then? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, that was part of giving the Billick vote of confidence and then firing him 2 weeks later. So to me, it is all eyewash, right? Like people are asking me about it, and we've sat here and talked about it for 20 minutes. I think it's a fascinating conversation for sports radio, for intelligent guys like you and I, in the mix of what's going to happen on Monday in the natural life cycle, and to say, this guy would like to have a 5-year extension for $50 million instead of a 1-year dangle at $6.5 million when his brother's about to hit the market back into the NFL and get $8 or $9 million a year as the resident genius, as he did the first time at top of market with the 49ers. And guys like Bisciotti, much like the baseball manager who got nothing here a couple of weeks ago because none of them are getting any money, or the NHL coach where Reardon is coaching the Capitals for nothing because Trotz wasn't willing to do it with a ring for nothing anymore, that the NFL coaches have tried to push down salaries, but every time there's the LA Rams situation where you find a new genius and Gruden gets $10 million, there's a hardball named John or Jim that show their ring and say, if Gruden's worth 10, I'm worth 9, I'm worth 11. So that's not going the other way. I mean, one of the reasons Harbaugh got this job and Jim Schwartz and all those guys, Del Rio, is they were working for $3 million. And I know they were trying to push the salaries back that way, but it only takes one publicly funded Green Bay Packers to say top of market's $9.5 million a year in a 6-year deal. We'll throw an extra year in for John Harbaugh because his name's Harbaugh, and we'll give the Ravens a 2 and a 3 to do it. All of a sudden, Bisciotti goes from, I considered firing my head coach to, I got a couple of draft picks on the way out the door, and he didn't want to be here anymore, and, he wanted this other job, and maybe there is some internal pressure in that way, because it doesn't feel like kumbaya, dude, right? Like, all that being said, they're going to go play this game, and they're going to war, and good, and the videos are out, and we love John. If they love John, they're going to have to give John $50 million to love John, right? Because someone else is going to do that.
Yeah, and I want to be very clear about this. Us having this discussion, that doesn't mean that I necessarily don't believe that John Harbaugh will be back next year. It's just, I don't think it's a fait accompli. Like, I don't think the statement is as finite and as lock and key as many people perceived it to be.
Or like they were going to issue a press release Friday night, we're not going to talk about it on Monday morning, right?
Yeah, right. I think to me it feels much more like, hey, let's pump the brakes on some of the talk and some of the reports from 5 or 6 weeks ago. We've won games. John Harbaugh deserves credit for that, and let's table this. That for me, that it feels much more a case of let's table this, and we want to give the kind of sort of vote of confidence. And look, I mean, they're in the playoffs with the win on Sunday. So if they make the playoffs and if they win a home playoff game, then John should be back. I'm not going to sit here, even though I've been someone that's argued that maybe new
But here would be the case, though. The case would be, do you want him to coach your football team next year and into the future, no matter what happens here, or does he have to go win a home playoff game next week, like winning one home playoff game earns him a $50 million deal that he would get anywhere else? And if he's coming to work having to do that, he should probably fly them a middle finger and say, they think I'm prettier than you think I am right now, and it's January, and look, I'm winning playoff games for you. Yeah. If that doesn't make me worth $50 million, and I'm prettier to the New Carolina, owner, or to Jacksonville, because he's trying to shine his team up to go to London for the next contract, and he's willing to give me $11 million a year. All of that's literally for him and for all of the coaches that'll be out there, right? I mean, that's what. This is their, what Billick would always say, time for pay, time for play, right? This is their time for pay, all of them, for what seat they're going to sit in next year.
Right, and I'll sum this up very clearly because I think we buried the lead a little bit as far as what this decision should really be about is a very simple question. Do you believe John Harbaugh and his coaching staff are the best suited staff to develop Lamar Jackson, your new franchise quarterback? You took him in the first round. Joe Flacco's going to be gone. We know that at this point, barring something extremely strange happening at some point here in the coming weeks. Everyone's expectation is that Flacco's going to be gone and Lamar's going to be the guy next year, and you hope that he develops enough that you want him to be your guy in 2023. But it's very simple. If you think John Harbaugh and his staff are the absolute best staff to develop Lamar Jackson, to maximize his potential, to allow him to reach his ceiling, then to me, it should be a slam dunk then that they should be the staff. They should be the guys. Because that's who this comes down to. It's about the quarterback in the same way that it was about Joe Flacco for the longest time. And, the Ravens built around him, didn't build around him, however you want to slice up that argument. Joe Flacco was the highest paid player on the team and drove how they were going to do. And, he owns that in the same way that John Harbaugh and his staff, if they are retained, they're going to be directly tied to whether Lamar Jackson develops into a legitimate, good, above-average franchise quarterback. Now, you see flashes, but he's not there yet. So if you think he's the best, if Harbaugh and his staff is the best thing for Lamar Jackson, then extend him and let's move on. But if there's question about that, that's where this becomes complicated, and you talk about the contract and however this turns out. And again, I think if they make the playoffs and they win a game, then by all means, bring John back if you think that's what's best for Lamar. But I still look at that statement on Friday night, and nothing about that statement convinces me of anything other than let's table this until the end of the season and see where we are, because otherwise you would have just announced that you had a 4-year extension and we would have been talking about the Browns and that's it and wondering about the timing, but it would have been a more definite proposition that Harbaugh would be coaching next year. I still think there's some unknown to this situation that's frankly going to be fascinating to see how it plays out.
One more tentacle above and beyond just the game itself, which is a pretty delicious football week around here. We've got you covered. Luke's going to be out in Owings Mills all week. You can find him, Luke, at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. You can find me in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Kwanzaa, Festivus. I'm celebrating Festivus right now, Purple Festivus this week as we get ready for the Browns. Big doings out at WNST.net, where we never stop talking Baltimore sports.